think I'll just start with a little introduction. So thank you all for joining our webinar today. We're honored to have Marcia Brissett Bailey with us, the editor of the book Black, Brilliant, and Dyslexic in 2023. Marcia's book captures the diverse experiences of Black individuals living with dyslexia. It offers an intersectional perspective on crucial aspects of life, including the education system, workplace challenges, daily living, and entrepreneurship. The stories within highlight not only the struggle, but also the progress and contributions of the Black dyslexic community. So today, Marcia will introduce herself, and we'll talk about valuable lessons she learned throughout its creation and the impact it's had on others and the broader community as well. So hopefully we'll have a great, interesting conversation. I have some questions prepared once Marcia is done talking. And also for all our participants, feel free to ask some questions in the chat box during the talk, and I'll save for after as well. So yeah, any questions, feel free to just type them in the chat box as well. And yes, without further ado, I will let Marcia start talking, and I will share the link to her book in our chat here in the meantime. So great, Marcia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Grace, for your introduction. Really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to this afternoon. And I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining. Really appreciate, because this is some of the work, us talking about the dyslexia experience, the neurodiverse experience. And as I have on my front page, and changing that narrative, because if we're not at the table or having the discussion, how can we make change? Because we're living the experience. So I just want to give a little bit of a background to who I am and what I've been doing for the last how many years. And so the first slide I've got is that I am a SEND specialist. I've worked in education for the last 30 years. And my previous role recently to date was working in the local authority, supporting families and young people SEND. So I've really seen that spectrum of that kind of navigating the education system and what that looks like, from exclusion, permanent exclusion, to tribunals, SEND support. So that's really part of my interest, but also my passion, because I've had that lived experience. It's something I'm really engaged in. I've also worked for an organisation called Diversity and Ability, where again, supporting that narrative of the intersectionality conversation, but also working with universities. So I've worked right across from primary, secondary school to higher education, but my main career was as a careers advisor, working with post-16, and that's been a passion of mine, to help really develop and empower young people, and particularly to find their voice, but also find their passion, to reach their potential and thrive in whatever that is. And it doesn't need to be a race, and careers come to us at different points, and that's okay as well. So that's really me, and I've been amongst a lot of things, and I think I share this slide really because sometimes we don't always get to celebrate, and I didn't always celebrate. It was always like a tick, I've done that and I achieved and I've moved on. So that's just a little bit about me, and these are some really important parts in my life here at the side, but I know time is limited, so I will leave that for now. So this is me at primary school, and what we're going to do, Grace and I, today, is just put some context by me speaking initially, and then we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation. So just because I want to put it in context to just give you some kind of background to how we got to Black, Brilliant, and Dyslexic. So this is my school report. I'm really showing my age here because we've got ILIA, which is Inner London Education Authority, which is the time I went to school. And this is actually a real report. I actually have got it, but again, limited on time. I would have read some elements of my report talking about how amazing as a child I am, and I'm lovely but quiet, really find reading really tricky, not very good at maths, but try my best, but still need support because I'm not confident. So we can already see that there's this spiky profile, not very confident. My self-esteem is lowered. So there's something happening at school. And I would say it definitely was happening at school. I always say this, I love school, but school didn't love me. And that's where it began, I guess. And I don't want to say this because it's not everybody's experience, but I was really traumatized by school because I was really trying my best. I was showing up. I tried my best, but my best wasn't good enough and I didn't know why. So I decided to selectively mute, which means I just chose not to talk and thought by being invisible, then no one will ask me to read. But it wasn't the case. And it got really hard and hard. And I had to get additional support, which was thankfully by my mum, who really helped me and my dad by giving me that unconditional love. It was at the end of the last year of school. It's year 6 now, but what they said is that Marcia is never going to academically achieve. So they had written me off. And that kind of felt my whole secondary school experience as well, felt the same. And so, again, this is another conversation. We'll have to have a part 2, Grace, to really give more detail, but I'm really being really quick in sharing just that element of my story. One of the things that does play up and we don't talk about a lot, and again, it's another part 2 if we were to talk about the intersectionality, which is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, an American professor. Again, limited on time, I could really go into it, but I know for me, the intersections were at play. My environment, my education, my age, my gender, my culture, all of these have an impact on how I showed up. So the dyslexia was just another element and another layer. So it can be really complex. And I think we need to talk about this more when we're talking about dyslexia, because some people more privileged can pay for diagnosis. And there's a whole range of things to how we show up and how. So I feel there's some really good strengths from my cultural, that there was resilience, keep showing up, you know, but at the same time, it wasn't helpful when I didn't know how to ask for help. And sometimes felt like I had to show up, I had to work twice as hard, but I didn't see that in the classroom, how that represented. So intersectionality definitely had an impact on how I showed up at school. This is really important that I share that. So we've got the intersectionality showing up as a young Black girl who's, dyslexic, that everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will lead the whole life believing that it was stupid. Now, that's how it felt for me at school. I felt like I was showing up, but I couldn't climb that tree. I was that fish. And why was it? What was it about that system or that structure, those processes, why I couldn't show up? Because I knew, and I know that I had, my brain was thinking. I was thinking about things. I was a bit of a philosopher, really. So what was happening? Why couldn't I climb that tree? And this is the thing: we're testing everybody with the same kind of assessment or standardized testing, but we don't all fit that way of learning. So what can we do differently? And that really was difficult for me. So just to really put it round in a quick nutshell, because I'm so aware of time, and Grace and I have had the pleasure of speaking prior, and I do like to speak and then I think, oh gosh, we've gone into another subject. But this is the real key point for me when my government, because I had to retake my GCSEs. And when I was doing that, one of my government politics teachers said to me, Marcia, you are so articulate in the way you speak. And I find that so many other dyslexics I know and met, they've been told the same thing. You're so articulate. But what's happening is what you're speaking about is not what's on the paper. So it doesn't sort of parallel to how you're coming across. You're an A in the classroom orally, but on paper, there's something not quite happening. I think there's something we're going to look into, and you're going to do an assessment. Didn't even understand what the word assessment was, but I thought, okay, somebody's actually believing in me and thinking something's happening. And it was this wonderful lady, Jenny McWhinney, who I got the pleasure of meeting last year. I was looking for her for a while. I even put it on social media. She was the lady who assessed me and said, I think you're dyslexic. And then I had an educational psychologist report done. And then I thought, my gosh, I'm no longer stupid. I'm dyslexic. And that was the barrier for me, trying to show up in a system that didn't work for me, just like that, being that fish in the tree, as you saw. So I think I had to do a lot of forgiveness and kindness to myself through the process. And I love this quote, because one of the things Grace and I are going to talk about more is about my book journey and how I got there. But definitely this lady here, Dr. Maya Angelou, was one of my influences. And she's got this quote here: forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know before you learned it. And I had to do that. It makes me feel a bit emotional, because I had to do that piece of work. I had to do that inner child work, some people call it, to learn and discover again when I felt really crushed or crumbled by a system that I didn't fit into because of the way I learned. So I just think that's, and we may touch on it again with Grace, but it's something that's really dear to my heart about self-love and acceptance. And this is just a little bit about the fact that representation, again, why I came up with it, that intersectionality, didn't see people who look like me talking about dyslexia. And that was really hard at times. I didn't think, I did think I was the only Black person with dyslexia at one point. When I was about 16, you know, I did. And I can't. So this is really where the book journey starts. And I think we're going to leave it here just to have a little more conversation with Grace about, these are actually all my photos. I love taking pictures, and I don't necessarily learn through phonics. I learn through visuals, and not just about overlearning, but I can tell stories through seeing that be and then creating a story. So visualization is really part of my learning. And I don't think we see some of those other skills in the classroom as we do in our social media, and where the world has changed, soft skills are really a thing. And so I think I'm going to leave it there so we can have a conversation more, Grace. But I hope that gives everybody a bit of context and a little bit of insight to my journey as a child and where I am as an adult in writing the book Black, Brilliant and Dyslexic.
Great, thank you so much for that context. That was super interesting. And yeah, as Marcia mentioned, we're going to kind of dive into some questions about the origins and inspiration and the personal insights she gained from compiling this book and editing these stories and having this output come to life. So
can I just ask, is
yeah,
it helpful everybody to have the image at the back, or do you want us to stop sharing? Is it fine? Having my face looking like that.
I think it looks great. We have a little
Okay.
advertisement.
Okay, that's
And
fine. That's
people will
fine.
know how to access. Um, okay, great. Perfect. So my first question I have for you is, what inspired you to create Black, Brilliant and Dyslexic? And was there a particular moment that sparked the idea? Obviously, I know you touched a little bit on this, but going deeper into that.
Yeah, no, sure. It's going to sound strange, but I do believe in the power of thought. And I was about 10. So you remember I said that the teacher told me I was never going to academically achieve. Prior to that, when I was sometimes daydreaming in the classroom thinking, I'm really bored, I don't know how to get into whatever's being taught because it's just going too fast, I used to think about being a writer. And Maya Angelou was one of those people that really influenced me, because I know she also selectively muted through trauma. And her stories really resonated with me. Even though she's an American, it was quite easy through the emotions and the feelings that she shared and wrote about. It just resonated with me. And I said to myself, and I must have been 10 or so, that I'm going to be a writer. And I said that, and I believed in it. I truly believed I'm going to be a writer. I didn't know how and when and how it was going to be possible, because I knew I was struggling with writing. But the thing is, for my dyslexia, I love words, I love poetry, and I love the way that words can take you on a journey. And I'm a great believer of storytelling. And I know from my ancestral roots, storytelling is a way of people surviving and telling their stories and passing things down. And I feel like I am part of that kind of ancestry root of storytelling. I love telling stories. And through, like, you can see those photos, I can look at one of those photos and tell a story. And it doesn't have to just start with words. It starts with the vision and the the feeling that you're feeling through those images that you may be seeing. And that's how I can start things. So yes, to answer the question, I went around that a bit, Grace.
No, it's
But I would
great.
say I said to myself, I'm going to be an author at the age of 10.
Yeah.
And it stayed within me. And that's, yeah, the power of thought, if we believe in it. And what happens after that is a funny one, because I've always been writing. I like journaling. I've got so many journals. I write and write and write. I like the feeling of how from your brain that it communicates into your hand. And I like that kind of, it's quite therapeutic. So I do a lot of mind mapping, which is like, right, say, like I said, okay, fly. I don't know, I thought of fly, and then I say flowers, bees. And so I do that kind of mapping, how my brain works, and I process that into, some kind of format on paper. And so I've been doing that for ages. And then it was just, I've been in a few books actually, and it was just, I was being asked to have to agree a contract for being in someone's book, so that the ownership wasn't like I would be asking for royalties or anything. And it was at that moment the publishers, I said, oh, I've got a book. I've got loads of books in my head, but I've got a book and it hasn't been finished yet. And they said, well, we'd like to have a look. And you need to do this proposal and everything like that. And that was my opening break to where we have Black Brilliant Dyslexic. They had a look at the proposal. It wasn't quite right, but they loved the idea of what the story I wanted to bring. And they said, we're going to get you a mentor. I was so fortunate they got me a mentor, and we got through, and I got through the book proposal. And that's really how the story had. But the fact that I thought about it when I was 10 and it still was embedded got to where I am today in terms of writing that book. I hope that answered the question to anybody
No,
listening.
it more than answered the question. One of the things I would like to follow up on that is that you mentioned you had a mentor that helped you with this. So can you kind of speak about like what you looked for in a mentor and what you think made that mentor have your dream come to life, and maybe like what other people should look for in a mentor?
Yeah, I think mentorship can be really helpful for us, just like I think and no coaching can help, because I've had both. The mentor was actually selected via the publishers as somebody who writes books around dyslexia. Her name's Margaret Rook. She's written some amazing books around the power of dyslexia. I've got them here somewhere, but she was actually, they just thought she would be similar because of what I was trying to achieve, and she had written a few books already. So they chose her because they thought of the similarity. But it worked because she was able to highlight areas where I could explore a little bit more in my development of what I was trying to write. And I was also what was helpful, because I could talk it through and I was very clear about the things I wanted to do. So one of the things about Black Brilliant and Dyslexic, it's not just my story. You can see that, yeah. It's not just my story, it's 25 other people's stories. And it started at 12 was the cutoff, but I managed to get 25. If some of us are neurodiverse, we can sometimes be influential in like, oh, please, And so it was always just one more person. And probably if I was still writing the book, I'd be thinking, can I just add another person? You got to have a cutoff, but I managed to get 25 different stories, because I feel it's not about my story, it's about our stories as a collective. I do believe in collaborative kind of working, because I think that's where the power is. We can have one voice, but it's so good having more than one voice, and knowing that our stories are all different, like I said about that intersectionality piece.
Right.
And I think that story is important to tell as well, and we don't always see that in a collective book. I've actually got quotes and poems in there as well from people, so I managed to even get more than 25 in there, because I was being creative about how I can make it more accessible, and also more people in the book, so it's a bit cheeky. So to answer your, on a serious note about the mentoring, I think mentoring is something where if you can find somebody who you could ask to be a mentor. I've asked people to be a mentor before, but coaching has really helped me as well to really think about my thoughts and how I see things, and how I may look at it. And sometimes having somebody maybe a bit more linear or a bit more focused or strategic in those thoughts to manage it in a direction that may help you just to keep on track sometimes. Because I can think about things 100 miles an hour and I've got so many ideas. So how do we break those ideas into more construction way? And so a mentor's been, Margaret was really good at doing it and looking through my chapters and making sure it kept in line, because those are some of the things, let's say, as a dyslexic, it can be difficult. And I do struggle with some of those, putting it into a structure, because I've got so many things and so many ideas. And it's how do you contain that in a different way? It's the ideas are really good, and that's a strength. But then because we're working in a confined way of how we're meant to present things, more linear or ropey way, it doesn't work with the way my brain works. But it's important too. So developing those skills and having a mentor to help you, it's something that I've got a lot of value from.
Right. Yeah. And another thing I would love to follow up on is that you mentioned you started with 12 stories, and then obviously that evolved into 25. So you have a wide range of stories in your book. So through the process of editing, what were some of the most surprising or enlightening things you learned that you maybe weren't expecting?
So one of the things I learned, and I like researching, and gosh, I would love to do more of it because there's so many things. But what I found is that predominantly all of those in the book, I think we've got some pictures here. So these are some of the in the background here, some of the people, some of the authors in the and written chapters, is that majority of them got diagnosed with dyslexia at university. And I think that's really interesting. And if we was to sort of, even though the book does highlight some of their journey, what happened in those processes? So, I've been told I'm fortunate at 16 that I got diagnosed. So what happened to everybody else? So thank goodness if you go to university, but say if you don't. So that was one of the interesting things that came out of the book. Also that that co-occurring or overlapping, that not everybody's just dyslexic. I don't know if there's an authentic or unique, not unique, but organically we're just a classic dyslexia and it's just dyslexia. I do feel there's things that can co-occur in other ways. So some people who are in the book, they're not just dyslexic, they're autistic, they're ADHD, there are other learning differences or neurodiversity kind of umbrella kind of terms that overlap or intersynced within that. So I think that was interesting to see, and I hope empowers or inspires others to see that we like it says here, we're not all neurodiverse, we're just not marginalized by it. So there's aspects of different things showing up, and it's great to see that other Black and brown people can tell those stories and be believed through this book, that actually, because sometimes I wasn't listened to, or sometimes I wasn't being believed and could be overlooked because of that intersection or that marginalization, that you can't possibly be dyslexic and Black.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about it, I've got younger authors in there as well. And what's interesting, I'm also a parent of a young person who's dyslexic as well, and that some of the structures are still there and it's still real. So even though there's a sort of generational gaps there, we're still seeing some of the same kind of experiences. So again, we have to put that back to a system that's probably not designed for the way that we think and learn. And so that's why we're getting those intersections or those cracks in where people are falling through, because we're not fulfilling, but we're not giving the right support for them to thrive. So then that kind of self-esteem, feeling, that imposter, sabotaging himself, this is not me, it's still happening. How many years later have I been to school and we're still getting, and so this becomes still the work, and why I'm passionate to do the work I do and write the story that I did. I believed I wanted and said I was going to be author, but it really, really happened that I feel that I'm able to be in spaces like with you, Grace, and talk about this more, so we can normalize it, that this is part of, it's, the condition of how my brain works is real. It's not made up. I'm dyslexic, but with all of those challenges, how can we normalize it, that it's part of a biodiversity rather than it's a thing that it's like it's just a thing that, it's a defect in. And I don't want to even say that word, but that's where the history of where it's coming from. But it's not. This is the way I think, this is the way I am, and this is the way I show up. And we need to just accept that and then get over ourselves and look at systems and inclusive practice that makes us be able to be our best.
That's great. No, I love that. I just wanted to get to some of the questions we have from attendees. So one of the first questions we have, speaking, obviously, you're a mom with a daughter in a school system. So if you could change one thing about the school system today, what would it be?
Ooh. See, I really love the idea of education, but I think there needs to be more understanding, and if we could say a dyslexia friendly classroom, it's going to help everybody, right? Or other people. So it's a tricky one. I don't want to say about screening. I just want happy children. I want a happy environment that has a range of different approaches to learning and being more innovative and more up to date. I do think, this is just me speaking. I can't speak for anybody else, and I'm not nobody's, but I do think our education system's outdated. And I think there are a lot of children who are bored sometimes with what they're learning, And I think we need to be listening to our young people more about what we can do differently and trust in that process. I've seen some amazing assistive technology, amazing way to make learning interactive through IT, AI, and stuff like that. And we need to believe them and try to be with them as well. And it's a two-way learning process. So what I would say is that I think we need to be more innovativeness. I can't say the word because dyslexia does affect the language, but innovative in the way that we're thinking about learning. And I don't know if I've answered the question, but
Yeah.
I hope, yeah, I don't want to get into picking little things. I could say we should screen all children, we should do all of these things, we should do all of those things, and just believe in children to show up as themselves, and helping them to thrive in the best way, and looking at that and not marginalizing them. Because this is a system that we have to, it's a statutory duty, and unless you go homeschooling and all these other things. So I think we just need to look at the way we are teaching and learning in our school systems. I hope that, yeah, I think I'm going too long now. I don't want to dig myself in a hole, because there's so much to the education system we could unpick. And I just feel that it's a part 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I'm trying to stay positive.
No,
There's some positive things to learning, and yeah.
yeah.
And there's positive experience. I think as a parent, I think, I know between my husband and I, we've had to fight. It took us 2 years to get a diagnosis, and that's because, and I'm aware, and I have the insight and knowledge. So if we're thinking about parents who are unaware and they fall between those cracks of whether it's the environment, the right school education, then it might be a different story. So there's lots of things to be had, but I'm trying to stay positive. So there's some really positive things happening, and there is awareness now to when I was at school, but there's still things we can always keep continuing to learn and improve and grow. Nothing's perfect, and I wish I knew that when I was at school, because I always thought everybody else is perfect and I wasn't. But the society is not perfect, but we have to keep evolving and having the conversations to how we can do things differently.
Yeah, that's great. A follow-up kind of question, because you mentioned that so many of the people featured in your book were diagnosed at a university level and when they were adults, do you have any advice for teachers on how to recognize dyslexia earlier or easier?
All recognize. I won't go into teacher training because that's another subject in itself, in terms of the whole neurodiversity and supporting teachers in this process, because I think it's not even policy, it's about the cultures of our education system and our schools, to how they best support children when they're coming into their school from reception to year one, and looking at some of the challenges. It can be, and I don't want to, remember, this is from my lived experience. I can't speak for everybody, I can't speak for every dyslexic person, but from my experience, there could be some things, and just through my work, sort of behaviors, being those sharpener kids who want to go out the classroom, and when it's a reading time, or something whereby they may be really struggling with the same words. So one of the things I detected from my daughter and I'm looking for it already, because I know dyslexia is genetic. So we used to read floppy and chip, for example. So I'm going to be really quick, but we keep getting to floppy, the same thing. We're not recognizing floppy. And that's why I say phonics is not for everybody and not for every child. And we need to have different ways of helping or supporting our children to learn to read. I don't read by phonics. I learn by chunking or by visualizing the whole word. So I read words by whole rather than breaking them down. I can. So we've got to look at different ways, again, in terms of the learning styles are in our class, whether it's multisensory. But to answer the question, yeah, I'm saying free, but again, this is really typical, stereotypical things, that it could be a child's behavior, because I feel behavior is a form of communication. It doesn't mean to exclude the child, but we have to unpick what's happening, and that could be something to do with struggling with learning. It could be that child always wants to go out or go toilet or go somewhere, but not be in the classroom. And it could be something around sensory or the environment of the classroom, and something about reading some of the words and just not recognizing them. So I don't know. As I said, I'm not a practitioner. I'm just somebody who's living with dyslexia and has a child with dyslexia. And that's just two things. But there's so many things, from tying your shoelaces, telling the time, organization, handwriting, and they can overlap with dyspraxia. So there's so many things that could be there. But if we see something and we feel, oh, that's the work. Identify and maybe speaking to your Senko or somebody to say, I think something's happening with this young person or child that it may be worth looking at. That the fact of being aware of something is a starting point, and then taking that further as a referral is a good starting place, and having those conversations.
Great. Oh, that's great advice. Thank you. I have a question that was asked a little bit ago, so thanks for your patience.
Sorry, they're so long. I'm
Oh, no,
trying.
no, no. It was my order. I just wanted to get the school kind of questions first. But how did you find the contributors? And did you find it difficult at any point to find contributors who were open to talking about being dyslexic?
Oh, I first started with my own network, to be honest, because that's who I knew in my network of dyslexia. And the time I've sort of been talking about dyslexia, I used my network. So somebody, when I was doing my master's, I got a master's in special education. So somebody from my group, she was dyslexic, so we hanged on. We were like Klingons. We did everything together. So she's in the book. Yeah, there's mostly a lot of friends. And then I took it out to the wider people who I was on LinkedIn with.
Mhm.
Would you like to be in my book? Don't know you, but would you like to be my book? So it started, to answer the question, because I know I can go off and answer the question and then more. It started with my own initial network, and then it went out to my broader kind of network of people I know within my social media network. And so that's really where it starts. So I've got family in there. So my
Mhm.
daughter's in the book, and I've got other family members in there, and then my friends, and then the wider group of people I didn't really know well, but just thought, really would love you to be in my book because I love what you do, and would you consider it? So that was initially how I started. There were some other conversations where people recommended people.
Mhm.
So Lizzie Tacky, who's in there, she recommended two people. And so I've got people from America because of
Mhm.
Lizzie, Elizabeth, who recommended. So there was those kinds of links as well. So it's a range. I wanted to be as broad as I can. So that's why I got all the quotes. So I've got lots of the people, whether it's from Ghana, from Nigeria, or America, who are in there, who people are just knowing the space, who are talking and sharing their lived experience. And I just
And
thought, let's put it in a book if we can.
yeah, I'm just curious, was there anyone who this was like their first time writing about being dyslexic or publishing that they were dyslexic, or were they mostly people who have spoken about it before, and were more
Oh,
comfortable
I'm
in
gonna
that
have to
way?
let me have a look as I'm looking through the.
Yeah.
I think it's a mixture, because
Hmm.
my friend from uni, no, she had never talked about it
Yeah.
until. Yeah, I think there's a mix. Yeah, there's another person there who I didn't know. He's actually from a friend of my husband, Rod Shields. Again, he talks about it, not really. So I think it's a mix of people who have written things so powerful, like poems. They had never done anything. I've got, Natasha Nope never talked about it. She's a dancer. So I think it's a real mix, to be honest. And I'm really glad for that, because
Yeah.
I also really tried really hard to get men in the book, because we don't always hear
Mm.
um Mel's perspective on, their journey with it. So that was really important to me as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you
Mhm.
for bringing that up.
Yeah.
And some other questions we have is, can you share any success stories or positive outcomes from your efforts to improve education for dyslexic students?
So I think I need a little bit more, because my brain's kind of thinking, what do you mean by sort of, did you say successes or?
Yeah, like I guess any of the success stories for people that you think like from your work that would help improve other
See, I
people.
go into this mini philosophy to what success means and what it
Right.
does mean. And so my brain struggles with that, because that's the thing at school, being successful, yes, we achieve. So I struggle with it, but I do think I understand the question, because you see, that's the linear part of my brain, like saying, well, what is success? It's like really staying with that. But I think there's a lot of people from the book have gone on to do other things, which is great, and are still doing amazing things, if that's what you're asking me.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm being asked. So I
Yeah.
think I'm struggling with the question, because I think the success is blocking me from that. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, because we're all successful in our own ways, isn't it? In what, if it's a pigeon step to a big milestone of achievement, to whatever that looks like for the individual. And I struggle with the word success, even though I
Yeah.
do use it. But
That's a great point.
Yeah, but that's just me. It's not that it's a bad question. It's just
Yeah.
me struggling with how to answer that, because I think the success is that we got a book out there and people felt they could tell their story, and that means a lot to me. That people could trusted me, didn't know what it's going to look like, and
Yeah.
that's the success of it. That people trusted me with their stories, and I really appreciate and value that so much, and don't take it for granted.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
so I don't know if I've answered the question. This is the
no,
neurodiversity, I'm
no,
afraid. It's like,
no, I think it's great. Um, in creating a neuro-inclusive workplace and building awareness and knowledge, how should we ensure representation as part of what we do?
see, no one wants a tick box. So I wouldn't want to say we have organizations and we just have a tick box for having a tick box space. We have to take ownership and accountability to what our organizations look like and the culture of those. So, from our onboarding, from our recruitment,
Sorry.
we Uh, so from our recruitment onboarding, what does that look like? It's no good having on the outside, having something that looks good, but in the inside, when you go there, it's not psychologically safe. So again, it's a kind of really open question to me. It's like you've got to do the inside work, just like I've had to do the inside work to develop myself again, because I was really kind of traumatized by a school system in our workplace and organizations. I think we're doing really good in lots of ways to compare to sometimes the education system, but in there we have to look at the work cultures. And so we draw to our leadership, and if our leadership within our organizations are on that page of inclusivity, then we're on a good start and a good starting point to really do the work. It's an ongoing thing. We're never going to get it perfect, but we need to have sometimes those uncomfortable conversations to be comfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think we're working towards, but I think there's a culture, and we that sometimes you feel when you go in there, I don't feel quite safe, or if I say this, and we need to understand the cultures of our organization, the people will work in it. We need to have better relationships so people feel comfortable to say something, so they don't feel they have to mask or get a coach outside of work, or don't ask for access to work or disclose, because they can feel if they said something, someone's going to say something, or it's going to be a performance manager coming in because that manager hasn't had the training. And so we've got to also realize, because of the cultures or our organizations not doing those pieces of work, then it makes people feel unsafe and not want to be in places where they can thrive if they've got the right support or reasonable adjustments, but they need the right support and they need a safe space to
No.
be able to thrive. So I hope that answers the question. Again, I'm making it really broad because that's another workshop or
Mhm.
another talk that, if you want to have a part two, but that's some of the work that I do as well, talking about the workplace from your marketing and your communication to your recruitment, onboarding, to do I disclose now or do I not disclose, or do I have to have this assessment, can I ask for extra time because I need time to process it. That's all about our organizations and how they look at doing the inside work to process, to make everyone feel they belong. So again, if you ask me things, I go really long. So I'm trying to narrow it down a little bit, but it's about our work culture. It's about people feeling safe and how we include our staff, to make them feel safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, great. Thanks for
So inclusive practice all the way for sure, but we have to put things in place. And one of the things I will say as well that I had that really benefit is having a coach through Access to Work, which is something based in the UK. Some organisations, whether they're civil service, they might not have it in that way, but a lot of organisations, public service, you can apply for Access to Work, in
mm,
get additional support. So there's lots of things, but I'll stop there because it's more than one thing. But if I say work cultures and our leadership, I hope you get what I mean, and training our middle managers, because I think there's something, again, those cracks of the intersections that get missing, because if we don't train our staff to have inclusive understanding, awareness, it will go into other things like this school, this system of like, we've got to measure, it's got to be targets, it's got to be rigid, and it's not happy for anybody. It's not a happy place for everybody when we start doing that reaction
right,
kind of thing without doing the work. So there's work and continuous training, like anything is a continuous thing.
right. Great. No, thanks for shedding light on that. Another
Yeah.
question I have for you is if the book is available as an audiobook.
right, how long's a piece of string? If anyone's here from the publishers, please, it's something I'm asked constantly, but it's not my decision. You have to be, and I'm being transparent about this, you have to be selected to be considered to get the audio. So it's on what do you call the other book you get? So it's
Kindle.
yeah, you can have it on Kindle, but as an audio, I would say yes all day. It's a book about dyslexia, please. Of course, I would want it to be audio, but if people write in to the publishers, I'm not going to say, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but, to say we really would love this in audio. I mean, there's an intersectionality piece there as well. How many people are accessing books in different ways? Audio is the way to go for some of us, and that's why I'm advocating for it, but it's not down to me. So the answer, again, I keep telling you, I do long-ended question answers, but no, it's not audio, but I would love it to be. So if you know any way of it can be through the publishers, please send the love that way. But I just wanted to remember, I had something to just say to go back on about the success, but the book contributors themselves are the success. And I just wanted to say that because it sometimes something lands with you. I don't know if other people experience it, if anyone neurodiverse, you hear it, but it takes a minute to process. So I will say the contributors are definitely the success of the book and that success piece that I was struggling with. So I hope that helps a little bit, because without them, it wouldn't be a book.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for sharing that as well. One other question we have is, was there any story that changed your view of your own journey that you highlighted in your book?
There's a few things. And again, I know initially the trigger of my teacher telling me I'll never academically achieve was a starting point for me seeing some light at the tunnel, to actually think that somebody wrote me off, and to think that, my parents grew me up, and, all of those kind of resilience and having to work twice as hard. And here was somebody telling me that, sorry, it's making me quite emotional, telling me that I wouldn't academically achieve. It was really hard because I really loved school and I showed up every day. And to think somebody had just said, could write somebody off. And that's where sometimes, and where I've seen in the education system, when children are being excluded, you don't know your body language and what you're communicating, but children are quite smart and they're picking up vibrations already. And then you're then saying right in front of the face, and that happens still. Like, they say things that's just not acceptable. You don't know how you're going to damage or crush that children's, potential, because you've said something. So for me, it went the other way. It's almost like sometimes if someone says I can't do it, I'm going to kind of try and do it and try and do it to the best I can. So that's me, but I know it's not been the journey for lots of us who are dyslexic, and why we know like 50% of those in the prison system are dyslexic or neurodiverse. And there is definitely a parallel to that through the education system. That would be a lovely piece of research to do, knowing some of those stories to how people get into prison, what their school journey was like. I definitely think there's a parallel to that. And I just feel quite blessed and fortunate that I had that mindset, because it could have been different because of those other intersections and those marginalizations and oppressions that are happening interwoven, which makes it even more complex. It could have been a different story for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. I love how you shed light on the other issues as well. So it opens up a whole other point for research and continued.
It's a real story, and that's why we talk about dyslexia. It's not just a lonely cousin to all of our other neurodiversity. It is, reading it is a currency. Do you go what I mean? It's still a currency for people to be successful. So here we go. I've used it to whether you go to university or have a successful job, we still need reading and that form of communication. So it can be a barrier if the system and the environment's not right for us to thrive. And this is why we're doing this work, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And I have these two questions I think they kind of bounce off each other.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the people who have inspired you, but what self-empowering techniques do you use to inspire yourself? And also, like, who helped you learn to accept yourself? So I guess, who helped you learn to accept yourself, and then what do you use today to inspire
You
yourself?
might have to say the question again. So
yeah,
I've got the first one. Who helped me to? It came from the support and love of others. I can't take that away. My parents were instrumental in that understanding of unconditional love. They didn't necessarily understand the education system, but what they did do was continue to support me and try to never give me pressure. But I think the line came with me when the teacher said I could never academically achieve. Remember I said that? So it then became that I had to go more into me. And I'm quite a reflective person. I did a lot of that. I had a lot of time at school to reflect. And I think that's what makes some of us great writers and story writers, story playwriters. I'm sure there's lots of dyslexic playwriters and all these kind of things, because you start to think about how other people feel, and that empathy piece comes. And so I had to do that work for myself. So when I was 16, I think I started to invest in myself. I started to go training. I started to find out more about dyslexia and learn about what that looked like for me, because I was already hacking the system to be at school in terms of finding templates, strategies. And this is before we had technology in the sense of what we have now in Google. That wasn't a thing when I was school. It was a dictionary, and you're like, well, if I can't spell the word, how do I look in the dictionary? So I learned how to do a lot of the dictionary and the words and memorize them, because that was my strategy. So what I had to do the inside work myself. And so what that entailed is investing in myself, doing some coaching. And that didn't come straight away. It was, I think we talked about this before, Grace, learning to ask for help. I think that was the first point, because there was shame and all of that taboo around dyslexia. And once I got over that and had the diagnosis, I started to ask for help. And then with that help, I developed strategies that helped me to navigate and show up and be myself. Because already I was thinking when I was diagnosed, and this is coming to the question again, sorry, that I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm a dyslexic. How do I choose? All of these are me. So the best thing I can do for myself is show up as me. And I know not all of us feel like that, but that's what it took for me to really get it. So doing affirmations, doing breathing, being creative, drawing and coloring, having a pause on the hecticness of having to work twice as hard as I have done in my career when I first started out, when I was kind of masking and staying up late in order to achieve the same as my colleagues, because I couldn't do it in the way they were doing it. So I had to do it my way and then quickly present it so it would all look the same. I think I've had to do a lot of inner child work. I mentioned that. So doing a lot of that inner child, almost, like I showed with that quote with Maya Angelou, just not apologizing, but say you didn't know anything more. And all you can do is now do the best you can to be you, and do that self-love and acceptance, and saying that this is me. How can I ask the questions? How can I get the right support so I can show up and be me and not feel that I'm always having to be a shadow of myself? So, and then the more I talked about it, that's made, and I've come out of my comfort zone as well. So it's a whole range of things. Again, it could be a separate thing in itself about your self-development in yourself and investing in yourself to get help to support yourself. And as I said, I'm an advocate of coaching, mentoring, and why I guess I became a careers advisor, to help people navigate and find their aspirations and reaching their potential. That's all the kind of things that have helped me. So I have a toolkit, I guess, of those things. And it's so many different things. I can't even pick one. I'm going around the questions.
No,
So
I think those were all good
the person who
examples.
asked it that got something from that. But it's consistency as well on developing me. I think what's helped me, I've been consistent with that. And it was a strategy that I didn't know I was doing. I've got to show up for me, and I've got to learn to love me.
Yeah.
And dyslexia is not, it doesn't discriminate. So it's not just me what has dyslexia, but how can I show up and be my best me and be my true version of me? And that sounds wishy-washy, but it's more that I was finding my strengths as well as knowing what my weaknesses are, so then I can show up as well, because the weaknesses to dyslexia are real as well.
Yeah.
I'm dyslexic every day. Put it that way. I don't know which day of dyslexia I'm going to have, which is going to be a good one or a bad one. But yeah, we're going to work with what it is, and be kind to ourselves and be compassionate about that as well.
Yeah. Great. No, thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to share a note that Helen, said she works for Calibri Audio, and they provide audiobooks to people with any form of print disability, including dyslexia, so they can help get it recorded as an audiobook. So
Wow. Oh, please,
Calibri
yeah,
Audio.
take the details, because I would love to find out how that could work, and how Jessica Kingsley Publishers would they be kind of in, do that collaboration. That was the word. You see,
Yeah.
dyslexia, sometimes I don't have the words, and that's another thing. You know what you want to say, and then the word doesn't come out at that time, but collaborate, or that would be amazing. So
Yeah.
please get in touch. I'm on all different socials. You can find me anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm not shy.
Yeah. Helen, wherever you found the webinar, I have Marcia tagged in like all the posts. So definitely that could be a great point to connect. So thank you for sharing that. So our last 3 questions we have. So, oh, great. Thanks, Helen. When you were talking about this work you've done in education in schools, do you go into schools, or are you part of an educational program?
No, I go into schools. So I do a lot of, I'm a consultant, and I facilitate workshops and work and collaborate and associate with other people as well, to do some of that work of going into schools. That's my passion. I think we have to start with the schools. If we can start with empowering young people, yeah, that's just where my heart is, because that was where my journey started, and discovering who I was, it was part of that, and feeling that I didn't belong. Some of the work I've done in the past is do steering groups and that, and we still got young people feel I'm send, they're mainstream, and I'm not part of that. And we want to change it. We want to all belong in that. But to answer the question, because you see, Grace, I've gone off again. Yes, I do independent work, and work in schools. I love, that's probably one of my favorite bits. And I've been a TA. I've worked as a TA, and I've done some amazing things in terms of my training to support children with SEND in the classroom. So it's something I know very well. But I love the primary school sector.
Great. Thank you for that. And I have 2 last questions for you. So one, seeing that this book is about being Black and dyslexic, do you think that Black people aren't getting screening as early as like white students?
Put it this way, there is some kind of intersection. There's some cracks there, and so just like we know now with, say, for example, assessments for ADHD, it was done on young white boys. And so you had a particular thing that maybe there's rows of cars, or autism. I think that was more of autism actually in the theory. Things show up differently. And I'm not saying, we're all human, right? But things show up different, and because of these intersections. So you may miss people because you're thinking it's something else. And I know for a fact, in the work I've worked and done within local authorities and stuff like that, there are a lot of young boys in particular, because I'm using that same thing, that kind of thing with boys and being assessed, and girls being missed out because we're masking, all these kind of things. I think there's something sometimes with race. I do own that and say that I think there are some, just from my work, this again is just from my lived experience, I can't speak for anybody else, where people fall in the cracks. And there is data to show that. So yes, I do feel, and sometimes, because, as I said, behavior is a form of communication, sometimes people get frustrated, sometimes people feel isolated, they don't feel safe or psychologically safe. And I think there should be a policy about psychological safety in schools. I do believe that, where children will show up and tell you what's going on, but we're not listening. And so we then see it as something else, and we then diagnose it as social, emotional, mental health behavior. In actual fact, they're just dyslexic, but these other behaviors come out because you haven't identified that. And it's a sweeping brush statement, and I'm not trying to make that, but this is the work of statistics and data, which is sometimes missing. But there is some data to show that there's quite a percentage of some people from the Black and brown community that are getting missed for different reasons. It can be that family members don't want that stigma and don't want that. So even if it is presented as that, I think your child might be, there's some development of relationships that needs to be happening, and trust with families from different cultures. But there's also that children are being missed for whatever reason. I don't want to make assumption, but just like myself, even though it's many moons ago, I got missed, and possibly my daughter could have got missed, because it's only because I was aware and she may be masking because she's able to do other things that her environment's given her the kind of tools to do so.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a swings around, but I do think there is some gaps there. I haven't got the data right in front of me, but there's data out there to show that some children in marginalized communities and in, you know, areas that are being missed and not being, and it can be for a number of reasons, but I don't want to dismiss the biases that sometimes people miss things and detect things. Like mine, I was always presenting myself as showing up, so you might not see it because I just want to do my best, but that doesn't mean that I'm not dyslexic. It just means I'm overcompensating in other areas to seem, I don't want to say normal, but do you know what I mean? To be fitting in some way. Yeah, so we can mask things. Yeah, that was a long-winded way. I'm so sorry.
No, thank you for shedding light on that.
Yeah.
The last
it's so
question,
many different things. It's such a complex question. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, thank you for shedding light on that. Last question is just like, is there a tool or program or technology that's come out recently that you recommend for people with dyslexia?
I mean, there's so many tools out there, but they're not necessary for dyslexia. I can think of quite a few what's out there. I do a lot of work with text help, and they've got assistive technology where you can speak into the text and it reads it back to you, it highlights it to you. It's got some amazing different features, but I don't work for any particular company. You've got screening pen, what screen things. We're still trying to work through. I'm not even going to get started about exams, but you know, where you may be able to use in exams. There are different softwares out there. I think I put a few in my book actually, but there are different companies. I don't want to say one's, and you know, I don't want to get into this is this and this is that, but there are definitely and I'll say that I use text help because I've used that for work. So that's part of my reasonable adjustment. So I can have things read back to me, because auditory, I'm sometimes better in hearing it. I like to read, but I also find auditory a better way of me processing it and then reading it as well. So I might do it twice in different ways. So I know that as a particular software, but as I said, I don't want, there are loads of things out there. And if someone wants to message me, I can tell them individually. I'm just mindful. I don't want to sort of be saying, this is it, because it's going to be different for each individual or young person. They may benefit for things in different ways, depending on how, I'll say it like that.
Great. Well, I know we're in our last minute, so that's all the questions I have for you. No, that's perfect. We made the most of our time together, which is exactly what I could have asked for. So everyone has the link to Marcia's book in the comments, and in a follow-up email, I will send that there as well, so you all can read it for yourself. And hopefully we will, from this webinar, be getting an audiobook.
There we go. We've got some, I think I've got some.
Great. Yeah, then you can follow Marcia on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and stay in touch there.
And never give up. I think I love using that, because there is a way, but it's, again, as I said, my last point is learning to ask for help, and you know, to get what you need is a first step. It's not always easy for everybody, especially as adults, to do that when you've been masking and sort of navigating the world in a way that you feel shame. There's shame in that, and I don't want people to feel shameful. I think it's stepping up, using, you know, like your group and others, to start trying to find a way to be able to show up, and I'll leave it there.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for having this conversation and sharing about your process and your book. And I hope everyone goes and gets a copy, and because I think it will be super interesting for everyone. And yes, hopefully we will be able to collaborate in the future with you, Marcia. Again, thank you so much. I will also have this webinar recorded and sent to everyone as well if they need to go back to any certain points.
Thank you so much, Grace, for having me.
Thank you. All right, we'll be in touch. Thanks all for attending. Bye.
Bye.